Unmute, and then hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Coach's Corner. We are here tonight to talk about data. We have a whole pile of data and statistics and people that are ready to talk about it with you. And we're talking data on numbers behind becoming a knight, something that a lot of us are really interested in. So, with no further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Duke Brannos to get us started, and I'm going to disappear and go man the slideshow.
All right. Thanks, so welcome, everyone. Look like we got a lot of folks coming out to see the episode. Data is always kind of fun to deal with. I will tell you, I have no data. My data is at the end of the stick usually. But the great part is I've been lucky enough to have known Count William. We were unbelts together. We traveled the circuit together. We traveled lots of miles together when Mid-Realm was still had North Shield and Eldemir, and we came up at kind of brothers in arms. And so, you know, he has this incredible amount of information basically from then. And then he dove and got everything in the back. He cleaned all that data up for us and put it all together. And it's been a labor of love for him. And then we have Bari, who is saying, he's like always collecting data. The guy scares me a little bit. I'm a little afraid he's a stalker. You know, I have a feeling he has data on like how much I make a year, what my bonus was, how much I paid in taxes. But anyways, that's Bari likes that stuff. And the great part is we had some other people that were kind of lined up. A few people fell through, but we do have some of their data as well. So I'm looking forward to kind of cue this up and get going. I'll probably have as many questions as everyone online. We're going to try to get to them as best we can. You know, chat away. It's and ask questions, because this is our favorite part of the show. Is sometimes my favorite part is watching the comments because there's some great answers. I'm like, oh, we're going to bring that one up because that's a great answer, right? So, you know, this is a great place that we can all kind of be together and talk and you know, throw ideas and answers back and forth. So, Bari, you're the one that came up with this crazy idea of numbers. So tell us why.
Well, as you said, I'm crazy. I'm absolutely a complete nerd when it comes to data. Yeah, I'll give you. So yeah, it was my idea for this program, and what sort of started this. I actually was hoping to reach out to you guys to get this done maybe a year ago, before I was actually one of the official coaches on this show. And at that point, I was just like, all right, well, let's just do it then. But a couple of things drove the ideas here, and one was I was sort of curious. How long does it take to become a knight? Like we always have it. It's not hard to find that data in terms of years. Enough people have done those studies. But I knew some people in our area that got knighted fairly quickly. And I remember one of them said something. He said, well, you know, I was doing 2 to 3 practices a week pretty consistently. And then this kind of light bulb went off. I was like, wow, that might get someone knighted 3 times as fast if they do 1 practice a week. And so I just started, you know, digging in and collecting some data from there. And then there was another one. I remember several years ago, Duke Brennan had posted something on Facebook. He said, hey, people ask me, what do I need to do to become a knight? And he's like, you know what? And he listed like his top 3 things. He's like, if you aren't doing these 3 things, if you aren't doing video review and Pell work and practicing this consistently, then you're not focused. You're not doing the right things. Like, don't, you know, it's not about whose hands you're shaking or what kind of boots you wear. So that's kind of what started the whole concept there. And like I said, I want to talk a little bit about the show, but at least the ideas I had here. So I have a very short study that Sir Brick out of the East put together, and I wanted to touch on that a little bit. And then Count William, I think, has a lot of data on the Mid-Realm. And I'm saying this just for the people listening to the show to let you know what we're going to get into. So a little bit of East Kingdom focused data, a lot of Mid-Realm focused data, and then I think the second half of the show, I have a chivalry poll that we got close to 400 people to respond to. And that is known worldwide. And we've got the averages and trends from all over the place, sort of focused onto what kinds of things help, which things don't help, how much do they help, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And wow, we already got questions on there, don't we? Anyway.
Yeah, we actually do. But William, tell us. I'm going to go ahead and cue William. Tell us when you started your your kind of quest on these numbers and why.
So, what I would say is, so I got knighted in 1994, and I had been around a lot of we would call old timers, 1970s chivalry that lived local or were near me, like Duke Andrew Seldom Rest, and a lot of those folks. And I remember you and I trooping around on the circuit. So they finally get knighted, and a bunch of these knights we'd met, and asking them questions. And it just seemed like our order of precedence, which isn't really a historic record, was not correct. And I was like, then it's like pulling a thread on a sweater, right? So I wrecked the whole thing. But the order helped, and we started fixing all the data, trying to get a correct application of, what is the order of chivalry, who's in it, who got elevated, period. It's not a political statement, it's just who got elevated. And when did they get elevated? Who'd they get elevated by? Who were they squired to? Were they ever a royal champion? And on and on and on. And that kind of got us to where we are now over the years. I added some age statistics. People asked questions, and people would ask me questions about the data. And I would say, well, I don't have that right now, but we could get it, which leads us here. And I don't know if you want to pull up the slides and want me to start going through, or do you want to do your slides first, Barry?
Yeah. Let me do the East Kingdom ones first because they're pretty short. Brannos, you want to say something?
Before we start, let's hit this question because I think it's a good one. And the reason why I think it's a good one is we're not going to have all the answers, and then I want everybody to know these are best averages that we can come up with from input. Everybody's passed their own path. There's everything from how you look, how you fight, your personality. All of these traits are things that get kind of averaged together, and the path comes through that way. And the kingdom culture actually has a large impact on that as well. The first question was actually, how would one pursue knighthood while in the military? And that's a hard one because in the past, between the military and colleges, that's where the majority of this society kind of started up. I remember when I was around, there was a military group on a aircraft carrier that fought on deck. And I think that has since just maybe 20 years ago is not there anymore. But, there was military, the military group in Germany had stuff. I remember sending armor, like loaner armor, out to groups in military groups. So it was very popular because, it was combat. They let people do it. It's recreation, and they're always trying to find better ways than everybody go out, and do the things military people do sometimes. I don't know if that's as popular anymore. I couldn't tell you. Maybe somebody here in the common area can comment on that. But I know, for one, it also sometimes, I would say, to answer your question, the best way is Pell practice. If you can find something, good part is you can do Pell practice with almost anything. Tires, a pole, anything to strike, and a piece of wood. Just make sure your grip is pad. Make sure watch when you're hitting a blank or hard object with another hard object. It's not great for your hands. But the piece is you can practice those things, but you're kind of on your own a bit. And my suggestion is go find, if you have and can get onto the internet, go find videos and start watching those videos and practicing what you're seeing. Send questions out when you can. Just let them know that you may not get back to them right away because you're in the military. Be prepared to send video. People, there are a lot of, I run through video all the time, and Sean and Barry and Williams have been doing video forever as well. So don't be afraid to ask somebody to review your video, especially if they're in your kingdom, because it's the first place that they can say, well, that really, this is the reason why it doesn't work in our kingdom. Or, it's they can also help you culturally while they're training you online on how your kingdom works. And I think all of those pieces are the best thing. And then when you have a chance and you got leave, schedule it around something you can go to. Even if it's a couple times a year, it is a way for you to get a chance to meet people, get to know people. And that's the biggest part, because we are a social organization. So just be aware. Those are the things I would say. But there's a lot of learning. Your good part is you're going to take care of the military is going to take care of the physical part for you. You're going to get strong. You're going to get lean. You're going to get endurance, right? You got the technical part, which is the fighting part. You can get a lot of that online more than ever. And maybe you do find somebody they can actually just build boffer swords and go at it, right? And then there's the education part, and that's really where all the online content comes from. And that will help you. And there's all kinds of content. There's all kinds of books, there's videos, there's audiobooks. Burn through those. Those are the big 3 things to do. And then the last place is go do it somewhere. And the one thing I will say, depending on what kingdom you're in, is be careful. The military mindset sometimes will breed that gung-ho piece, and sometimes that gung-ho piece is a little more than people can handle. So just watch that. I know personally, and William, you can disagree with me, I know in our kingdom, we're the Midwest, the cussing and the swearing that comes out of the military sometimes, and the aggressiveness that comes out because they're breeding it in you because they have to, because that's what keeps you alive, comes out a different way in the Midwest culture. So sometimes that could actually hurt you. So just be careful around that. The good part is, if you know, then you know who you have to be careful around. When you don't know is when it actually hurts more.
No, you're 100% right on with that.
All right, go ahead, Barry.
Yeah. Let's cut right into the data there. So, Cy, you can pull up slide 1. Like I said, I'm going to do a couple quick ones right here. This was actually put together by Sir Brick out of the East Kingdom. This name's up the top there, Kyle Payne. And I think this tracks pretty well society-wide. Maybe not in terms of the total years, but and I should explain, just in case you're not a data person, these are box and whisker plots. So what that means is at the very middle where the 2 colors change, that's the mean. That's the median. So that would be the middle number. 50% of the people got knighted quicker than that number, and 50% got knighted. It took them longer than that number. And then the tops and bottoms of the boxes are going to be your first 25% and then your last 25%. And then the lines at the very top and the very bottom, that's your quickest, and that's your, those are your most extreme cases. The quickest person got knighted at the bottom line. The longest person got knighted at the top line. And what we see here is, if we go back to, this is a little small and my eyes don't work anymore. I think we start in the 60s, or is that the 70s? But yeah, we see how it didn't take nearly as long to get knighted back in the 70s as it does now. And it kind of grows over time. And I remember when I got knighted 2 summers ago, a couple of really long-time SCA people came in to my vigil, and I can't remember their names, but they gave these great talks. And one of the things they said was, yeah, it's different from what it was in the 70s, but this is the society you live in now. So you can't compare yourself, to what it was back then. I mean, and probably the worst knight to get knighted today might be better than the best knight who fought in the 70s, just because we've learned so much more since then. So you really can't look at that. But at the same time, it does help. I know in the order we have this conversation, like, we don't want to make it hard for people to get knighted. We do want to push people. We do want to make sure that they earn it. But the goal is not to just make it harder and harder and harder. This is something that has climbed over the years. And if we go to the next slide, Sive, please. Slide number 2. Yeah, and this one is actually broken down by year. Again, this is just the East Kingdom. And you see particularly, and I've got actual averages. I can't read these right here, but I've got actual averages on my slides we'll cover later. But I think it went from something like, in the 70s, it was like 4 years was the average time it took to get knighted. By the 90s, it was about 8 years. And now we're up to something like 10, 11, 12 years. One interesting thing to think about, we have to be careful when we read data, and we try not to get too literal with the data, because sometimes the data doesn't tell us what we think it does. So as an example, it does tell us that it might be harder to get knighted now than it used to, but we know in the East, in about the last 8 years, they actually kind of reset the standards, and it got a little bit easier to get knighted than it used to. And we found out that the average length to get knighted actually got longer. And that doesn't make sense at first, but what ends up happening is you had a lot of people that had already been fighting for 15 years, and then you lower that bar just a bit, and now you're getting these people to start getting knighted. So it actually drives your numbers up, even though you sort of lowered the standard a bit. So that was one thing. At least that's what we believe is going on there. And I know, for example, if you look at the very top bar, on the very far right, the very top whisker there, that's a friend of mine from Philadelphia who's been fighting for 41 years. He got knighted 2 years ago. So like, that's him, it's not like they just changed, they decided yesterday that we're going to start taking 40 years to get knighted. It's just somebody that's been doing it that long and kind of made a little bit of push and got there. So that's what I have for my data for the East Kingdom stuff. And I think we can turn over to William, unless anyone has any questions, or if you guys want to say anything off of that.
I got a question then.
Sure.
And I apologize to the audience. Unfortunately, we have a hard time zooming in on these things, but we will make the data available. I think William will be able to help us a little bit if maybe the mid-round matches this. I think in the early off in the society, we just didn't have a lot to compare against. So the top people got knighted relatively fast, especially since they were winning all the tournaments and so on. Here's my concern to you and my question, and I'm going to throw this out there for everyone else, because I think they probably have some comments on that as well, is do you think that some of the problem now is that we do have so many more knights? This is something we brought up early while we're sitting, waiting for the show. We talk a little bit, and I posted it in the Coach's Corner, and that is, when William and I were going to practice in the early 90s, late 80s, I know my group had one practice, and we had a local knight, but he didn't really come out to practice. He was very motivational and ran the meetings and did all of that stuff. But it was a bunch of young kids just pushing their way through, figuring it out, right?
100%. I just want to build on that comment.
Yeah.
So when you and I got knighted, the crown was receiving in the Middle Kingdom about 28 to 30 polls. So to get 15 shiv, and I mean, Brannos and I were everywhere. We ruined cars driving so much as we did.
Yeah.
But the number of elevate votes that the crown might be looking at, so let's just use 50% as an idea. You had to basically get 15 of those 30 chivalry to say they thought they would counsel the crown. And today, on our last polling, I think we returned north of 70, which is down a little bit. But now, if you just said 50%, you're looking at 30, 35 council votes. And that's a little tougher to get. Gas prices are triple what they were when you and I were doing all that, driving 4 times what they were. But we also you can go to practices now and meet 10 knights. So that's a little bonus. But I do think it's just statistics. If the crown says they want 50% of the order to agree to something, and let me tell you, this problem is doubly magnified in the Order of the Pelican, of which you are also a member, where we're getting 130 poll returns. So I think some of this change is just due to the size of the order and a lot of people not traveling as much because they don't have to, and generally vote, just looking at trying to get these big numbers for the candidates.
So I think we have another scenario too, and somebody brought it up here, is that a couple things. One, it's easier to put your vote in now, electronically. I mean, back in the day, we sent it in. We had physical polls that we would send in. By the way, not every kingdom had polls. We are talking specifically about the mid-realm. At the time, the reason why we had polls, because we were the largest kingdom, most population. When I was king the first time, I believe we were around 8,000 people across the geographic area. and it's really difficult to see everybody. So the polls helped us, and helped the Crown understand what was happening. The other piece during that time is it was actually looked down upon in our kingdom that once you got knighted, you didn't fight in tournaments anymore. You gave the unbelts the opportunity to kind of live their dream like they had. So when I first started, it was pretty rare. We maybe got 1 or 2 knights that would fight in tournaments. And so it was a little bit harder to get seen. So that's why our Crown tournament ended up becoming one of those places that gets seen. And, at the time it was invitational because of some other reason, but we'd get, 80, 90 people in our Crown tournaments all the time, which half of them actually didn't want to win. They just wanted to be there to get seen by the knights that showed up. So, but, I'm going to jump to a more controversial statement on this. And that is, I think there's just personally a lot of knights that compare themselves now, 20, 30 years later, you compare others to the way they are now and not the way they were, because they don't want to hear what I voted on them when they got knighted, because I can tell you straight out, what I probably expect. I see people do something, I'm like, wow. And you're talking, buddy. I remember this conversation about you, and that kind of thing. So I think that's and I'm just pointing that out here because I think it's something that the knights also have to watch.
Yeah. Hey, Brannos, one of my friends had said it used to be that you would get knighted, you'd win crown a second time, become a duke, and then you were done. And he goes, next thing we know, all these dukes just kind of hung around and they just sort of carried the bar with them, So like you said, even myself, I'm a year and a half to being knighted, and I'm a much better fighter now than I was a year and a half ago. And I can't make the bar. They have to be better than me. Like the bar has to be a little bit below where I am now. And some people, I think, lose sight of that.
All right. So William, let's jump into your numbers a little bit, because there's a couple of questions popping up. I think your numbers start answering us. Like there's one that's, the data include average age of a fighter when they get knighted, so on.
Okay, so go ahead to the next slide. So I just want to, I think I already said it, the historical record of the Middle Kingdom. This is everybody ever elevated, period. The best to make a perfectly complete record. And for those of you who might not be familiar with Middle Kingdom awards, our AOA level fighting award is called the Order of the Red Company, the Sergeants. That order was created in August 18th, 1994. And then Order of the Red Company, Captain of the Gold Mace, is our grant level award. And it was created in April 8th of 2000. And for our many East Kingdom friends, this would be like Silver Tiger and OTC. Every kingdom has this structure more or less. So that's just a little bit of info so everybody knows what we're talking about. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's some baseline statistics that I think might just be interesting. I'm just going to go through them quickly. 282 chivalry, 270 knights, 12 masters, 51 not squired at the time of elevation, and that continues interestingly. We get about 1 out of 4, 1 out of 8 knights were not squires, members of the chivalry. We have a fair few pelicans who are also knights. We have a fair few laurels. We have 6 triple peers, and those are bestowed peerages, not saying that royal peers are not peers, but in the bestowed peerages, that would be having 3 bestowed peerages. We have 1 quad peer. And the bottom is a number that gets talked about a lot. And it was not a way to figure this out, because as a kingdom, we have no record of who authorized when. I mean, we started out, there weren't authorizations like everybody. Then we create authorizations on paper, and we put them in databases and lost them and found them. Okay. So what that table is just there to try and say is, if we have 282 chivalry ever made against how many authorized fighters we ever had, would tell you the percentage of the chivalry. So if we had 10,000 people authorized in the last 55 years, 2.8% of them have become chivalry. And it's just some stats to look at. If we only had 6,000 elevated, which is probably really low, and 10,000 might be low, there's just no way to know. So I made a little table. Historically, about 2.5% at certain eras were chivalry. So next slide. I'll zap through these. So this might be the one that everybody would find most interesting. This is the great myth debunking slide. Remember all those years, Brannos, and the kingdom when no knights got made? It was half a decade. It never happened. What this is, and I know it's a little tough to read, it is simply how many chivalry were made every reign. That's every reign of the Middle Kingdom. I don't have the current reign on. I always wait till the end of the reign to post the stats. So Louis and Sive's reign, which was the most recent that was completed, is on here. But you can see that it kind of goes up and down. And in the early days, the high reigns were maybe 4. There's a 5. You get in the central middle there, that's the 90s. And all 4 of our big reigns, there were 3 reigns in the 90s that made 9 chivalry in a 5 or a 6 month period. We do have some reigns that no knights were made, no chivalry was made, but they are infrequent. They represent 9 out of 105 reigns, or 8.6%.
Yeah. Hey,
so,
Wayne,
sure.
I had a quick question for you, because this actually follows some of the trends in the East Kingdom as well. And actually, for both of you, what do you think drives these waves that go up and down? Because it seems like on some level, it's almost like a correction and then an overcorrection the other direction, a correction back. Like, we're letting too many people in, we got to reset. Okay, now we've got so many good fighters out there that are just like, they're getting injured and they're really good fighters. Like, what are we doing? And then you kind of like open the doors, let a bunch in. I mean, what do you think's happening there? You guys have been around long enough to see this, and you've been in the polling circles and stuff. So you know
we're part of those. One of those 9 reigns is when I get knighted, and one of them was right after. One thing I think is that there's a perception, and maybe Brannos could speak on this when I finish this little comment. There's kind of a perception that, there was a log jam. Like, for some reason, there were just a preponderance of people who should have been knighted and weren't. And I don't know that I believe that that's absolutely true, but you look at growth of the kingdom, we had all these people. I mean, you're kind of bound to get some critical mass, but you got to have a crown that has the will to do that. 2 of those 9 reigns are owned by the same king.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got.
And I was made part of one of the 9s as well, actually.
Yeah.
Maybe I would have never made to be a knight then. I don't know.
Yeah. But the crown has to have the will to do it, or the interest. But and I don't know. I think we just had a surge, and then it returned to normal. We had some down reigns. You can see them there, where you got a stretch of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 12 reigns there, where there are no more than 2 made and some nuns made. And then you jump up and you see a 3 up to a 6, and you see some bouncing around.
It's interesting. I also wonder, and Guillaume, Sir Guillaume now, pointed it out, and that is, you see it's kind of jagged, but I think some of that, because of the culture of our kingdom and Penzic, many of these are Penzics.
Sure.
So you had
one of those.
Go ahead.
Right, one of those 9, 6 of them were at Penzic. The crown made 6 chivalry at Penzic, and I'm one of them. And in the reign that you were knighted in, there was a knighting every month. We were driving all over the kingdom to see our friends get knighted. And your knighting was actually at a non-fighting event, because it was the only event on the calendar. And we all came to see, I came to see my friend get knighted. So, you see corrections and
such. People probably like, what are all these fighters doing here?
True that. So anyways, I track this for this. I actually have this for all the orders in the kingdom, but it's interesting to look at. And as you pointed out, Barry, you got to be careful from just looking at this and drawing a conclusion. It's like, so next slide may answer a few more questions too along these lines. So here's your super metrics. And actually I made a mistake when I put that in. There aren't 10 reigns with 0. There are only 9. But reigns with 5 or more elevations, 17 against the 0s. So if you were to average those out, you'd get what's our elevation general? About 2.7. Between 2 and 3 per reign is very common, and you can see the rate grows And in the 90s, it's at its very highest at 4 average, or averaging, and then it settles down a little and it hits out into the 3.4. So, when you're talking about averages, you just need to remember as many above as below. And so you can see the rains kind of all split out in there. And you're looking at the amount of time, and five shiv a year kind of on average over 53, 54 years. Seems like we're right in there. A minor side note statistic is there are 6 knights in this kingdom who were elevated by the hand of the queen. Usually the prince put his hand on the sword, but there are that's a distinction that's interesting, that we have 6 knights who were elevated with the queen being the only member of the royal family present, the only sitting royal present. So the next slide is probably the one that's going to spark the most questions. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So here's the age stats, and I have some thoughts about this. So I started collecting age as best I could. It's impossible to get it much for the 70s, so everything in the 70s has to be taken with a bit of a grain of salt. So in our kingdom, in the Middle Kingdom, average time to get elevated across all decades is about 8 years. That's how long it took. Well, from the time I was squired to the time, which was when I got serious, to the time I got elevated was 6, and I got my AOA 2 years before that. And it's probably worth mentioning, all the data you see in my presentation is AOA to patent. Those are objective. People say, well, how long had the person been fighting? Got no idea. No way to track it. It's not written down anywhere. So, but I could ask people, how old were you when you were elevated? So I started this age process and also looking at the timing process. So you can see that we have some of these very long tenured people, but we still have people getting elevated in relatively short periods of time. And I liken it at some levels to a lot of people in the SCA, a lot of fighters spend a long time just kind of enjoying fighting and doing their thing, and they don't get really serious. If I was to tell you the number of knights out of the last probably 20 years, maybe even just 15 years, who damaged a knee, got it fixed, and realized if they didn't get it done, they weren't going to get knighted. And there's a fair few where that really was the motivator. But you need to make that commitment. But you also have folks who've just been in a long time and got their AOAs ages ago. And they throw the statistics kind of all out of whack. But we had several. If you look at our years jump, look at the 2010s. 31.8 was the max. 12 was the average, really high. But we had 5 or 6 people. We had 5 or 6 people in that were all over 25 years. And they throw your stats all out of whack, and you could say, oh my gosh, why was it so hard to get knighted in the 2010s? Well, it wasn't necessarily any harder. You just had some people kind of finish their path, along the road. And there was a question over there. Is there any data factor of household affiliations? No, although I do have for every member of the chivalry of the Middle Kingdom, if they were squired, who they were squired to. But that's the limit of it. Other people track households. I track hand to sword that traces your lineage as a member of the chivalry all the way back to the first knight of the society. But, you see some goofy stuff in the 70s. There was a 0.2 years because nobody got an AOA. They came into the society and they got knighted. Boom, And those are legends of the early founding of our kingdom in terms of people.
Yeah, and I think in many ways, though, that follows probably many other kingdoms when they first start. I will say something. It's kind of interesting. Many times, and I'm gonna throw this one out here. I see principalities become principalities because they don't feel like they're recognized enough. Their people aren't recognized enough, and you kind of get that flavor of okay, we're gonna become a principality so we can recognize people and we can do this, and then. It's funny, they're made kingdoms And you don't see a lot of knightings. Bang, it's like, we knew these people should have been knighted. That's not actually the case that usually happens. It's I've seen really both our principalities take their time. Eldemir took a long time to really start making knights. So I think you do get a perception that people aren't being made, but then when you have the opportunity to do it and they're still not being made, well, maybe it's just the perception and not the truth. So just 2 cents out there.
I actually had an interesting conversation. I won't name any names, but at one point, a group had the opportunity to make some chivalry, and they had felt perhaps that Middle Kingdom order was being too hard. I don't pretend to know their mind, but after some time had passed and that person joined the order, we bumped into each other and they said, I get it now. I kind of understand. There has to be a standard, and it's not good or bad. It's that there has to be some value in the thing, and we all have been on this road and we've paid some prices, and there are things we aren't going to do because we spent all our time in the lists or teaching or training or rums and on and on.
Yeah.
And we traded. Yeah.
Yeah, let me cut in on that. So something that I've noticed in the year and a half I've been on the list now is to let everyone know that's listening, you do have to have a standard. And the problem is if you remove or minimize that standard, it becomes a popularity contest, which is a whole lot worse than having the standard. Because a lot of people might think, oh, if they lowered that standard, then people in our region will get knighted. No, what's going to happen is that people from the cool regions or the cool households, wherever, and they don't even do that deliberately. It's just they want to help their friends. And so that's, having that fighting standard or, fighting service, ANS, whatever, appear like quality, stuff like that. It is important. But then the question is, once you have that standard, how difficult do you make it? The quote I heard somewhere is, what was it? Duke so-and-so said, well, that guy can't beat me, so I'm not going to knight him. And the answer was, they don't have to beat you to become a knight. They have to beat you to become king. So
that's correct.
Another thing about that too that's just worth mentioning is there have been those conversations where somebody said, well, it's too hard. Okay, well, we'll lower the standards so you can get in. But one thing that certainly happens in our kingdom, and perhaps it doesn't happen elsewhere, I don't know, but certainly when that new knight, that new member of the chivalry, knight, master, that new person has a big target on him, and all of their unbelt buddies are going to come and try and take him down a peg. And if we haven't done our job as knights, as chivalry, to ensure that the people coming into the order can hold the line, we aren't doing a very good job. And so we want those people to come in equipped with the appropriate skills, not just to be in our kingdom, but as they travel out and about. And I think that's important. I think that's why we have standards. To your point, Barry, that's 100%.
Yeah.
So here's a couple of things. First, I'm going to burn through a couple of quick comments and questions. Here's one from His Majesty Midrealm. It's interesting. The biggest growth years were early 2000s, and when there was the lowest volume of knightings. Now, of course, in that scenario, knightings take a number of years, so probably many of those knights would have been doing stuff in the 90s, and we already learned the 90s kind of tapped out that group of people with a lot of knights in our kingdom. Another question was, let's see here.
Let me just answer this. There's a
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to answer. There's a question over in about that the longest elevation in the 2010s was Duchess Helena Beckenham. So two things make her number exceptionally long. And if she was here, she could talk about it. But one is she got her AOA like the first year she was in the society. Most of us hung around in the society. I think I got mine in year 5 or something like that. And then she moved kingdoms a bunch. And that's not a female problem. That's a ska problem. People move kingdoms and it's just about that they have to start over. She got to our kingdom. She put in the work. She got elevated. If you looked at the time she spent in our kingdom to get elevated, it's far less than 31.8 years. But all I can give you as a metric to be objective is AOA to elevation. Go ahead, Brannos.
Okay. So, Louis talks about the same thing I talked about. He was just asking to the chivalry out there, do you actively compare to candidates against yourself or other peers? I know for one is I compare them to our newer members of our order. This is one thing I tell everybody I can tell is that the last person in the order, look at their prowess, because that's the minimum to take to get here at least, right? So, the key to remember is they were just made. So they have all the pieces that it takes to be a knight that person has. So take a look and try to add those things up. Maybe their prowess isn't, winning tournaments, but other things are. Another person mentioned that, we talked about the popularity contest piece. And it is, personality does matter. If you piss off everybody in your kingdom, most likely it'd take one of your friends to knight you, and then everybody around the known world gets pissed off. So, it's the idea being, we could try to be a medieval knight. In other words, all I have to do is be born in the right family, and then I'm going to run around and kill everybody I want. Guess what? That's not the game we play. So, yes, there is a popularity contest, and that also makes it harder for people that tend to be overly shy, or have a hard time engaging with people, not great at conversation. All the things, those are all things that you have to work on to become a knight. Those are not only do you fight, but you actually have to overcome other barriers that you may have had through your whole life. And some other things make up for that. An example of this is everybody thinks Duke Palomar is stuck up and won't talk to people. Well, it's funny, and I thought the same thing, by the way, because the day I kind of knew I was on our list was the day Palomar talked to me, because he had never bothered talking to me before. So, but what I found later is that this is just the way he is. He's a very quiet person. Actually, he's a very shy person. So what happens is it's very difficult for him to go engage with people. And of course, people are going to go engage with a duke. So that's just kind of how those things work. So be aware, some of these questions were, what takes into account, and a little bit of everything takes into account. So, just something to think about.
I think I only have one or two more slides. Why don't I just knock them out?
Yep.
Yeah, and if anybody took it wrong when I said Brannos got knighted at a rum event, that was the only event on the calendar that month.
Yeah.
If anybody remembers, when there weren't 5 events every weekend, it was a little tougher to get things done for the royalty, and they had to use what events were available. And that March, after you had gotten put on vigil, there was only one event left.
Yeah,
so
pretty much.
We all came to rum, and it was a great fun time. And
and
we all enjoyed it. But that was like an event, a weekend with only one event. Crazy. So I thought I'd throw this one stat up here. I thought this was interesting way to lay the data out to maybe try and have it make a little more sense. So across the bottom of this chart is how many years it took to get elevated, and the number is how many people landed on that number of years. So what we see is we have a really big grouping starting at around 4 years and going to about 10 years. So 4 to 10 is where you see a big bunch of the chivalry land in our kingdom anyways at getting elevated. And you got some at the short end, and as we go way out to the right, we see that there aren't a lot of folks who are taking 20 plus years. Out of 285 odd chivalry, 282, you're looking at the 20 plus crowd is about 12 or 14. But one of my thoughts on that is never give up on being elevated. Never quit. If you want to get elevated, if you want to join the Order of the Chivalry, don't quit. People get it done for their own reasons and in their own time. Brannos and I have sat. We've sat in, I don't even know how many chivalry meetings. I never once heard another member of the order or the crown say that person is too old to be knighted. I've never heard that. Nobody talks like that. Are they doing the work?
Yeah, that bugs me, actually. I've heard people are like, well, he's getting old. And usually it actually comes from their people around their own area. They're like, well, he's getting older, so it's going to be harder. Yeah, it is harder. But you know what? I'm getting old and I still learn and I still push. I tell you, I work harder now than I did before.
Far harder.
I'm still, and I've seen at least 3-4 people in my own area get knighted a lot more in their 50s, but literally in their late 50s.
Yeah. Currently, the oldest member of the chivalry elevated in our kingdom that I have a number for was 53.
No, I think we'd have to check Ragnar. He was older.
Well, okay. I don't have a data point for him. Maybe if somebody could tell me, I bet I could get one though. I didn't think of that. Okay. Next slide. I think there's one more on age. I think I did one more slide on, And then this is a little simpler way to look at elevation with the lows and the highs. And you can see the gold bar is that median number. And so it's we had a big tick up in the 2010s, but then it came back down in the 2000s. So I don't necessarily think it's too long or too short. I think it is what it is, and it has something to do with conditions, and your mileage may vary in your kingdom. Next slide.
Hey, I want to add one more thing, especially when we look at the 70s, just for perspective. I got knighted after 29 years. And again, that was about 23 years of screwing off. I'll be honest. I just, like I said, just enjoy my hobby, going to events, whenever I felt like it. A friend of mine got knighted after 39 years. That is impossible in the 70s. There's not a data point in the 70s like that because it is physically impossible to get knighted after 39 years in the 70s. So just one thing to think about. And someone actually said that in the comment section. Part of it's just the longer the society goes, the more you're going to have someone who's been doing it 40 years who gets knighted. That's not going to happen in the 70s. Not going to happen in the 80s. Hard to do in the 90s. So that's just how it is. That's part of it.
Yeah, I was going to say somebody posted Richard Larmer just got elevated this year, and we know him from way back, and that was a big congrats to him for hanging in there. I got to see him at Penzic, and we've known him since the old days when we were all squires. So that's a heck of an achievement.
Nice.
So I thought I'd throw up our AOA order metrics. So our Order of the Red Company, this is our AOA level fighting award. And when it was created, we've had 585 out of the chivalry elevated who had Red Company, 151. And we have about 30 odd who were not. And some of that even continues into the modern, but a lot of that is when you create an order, a lot of those early members, a lot of those folks who were on the cusp, and in fact, at the Penzic where it was created, one of the gentlemen who got knighted, Sir Ish, he was not in the Red Company. He was not placed in that original group. And so you do see it a little bit. Red Company's traditionally not given once you're knighted. So if we jump to my last slide, this is our grant award, Gold Mace. And I forgot to fix that. It should say Gold Mace. So you're on a shorter time frame. This award's only 22 years old, 165 members, 73 members of the chivalry came out of the Gold Mace. 51 did not receive the Gold Mace. But the difference here that's worth noting is the Gold Mace has occasionally been given to members of the chivalry. It does not have that. You generally don't see knights getting Red Companies, but with a lot of service to the Middle Kingdom Army, we have had some knights get it after the fact.
So another thing to point out is that the Gold Mace in our kingdom is actually more of a melee award than a fighting award. So there may be a lot of knights that some of the knights, even the Red Company has some pieces of that, but I've seen a number of knights get the Red Company just for being good fighters. That's up to the crown, but I haven't seen it quite as much in the Gold Mace.
Yeah. So again, relatively compared to 55 years of a kingdom, we only have about 22 years of stats here. So it'd be interesting to see what it looks like in 20 more years, those kinds of things. As Barry pointed out, some of the stats we can't have because of the early years of the SCA. And as we add orders, a lot of kingdoms had their grant fighting award, and ours didn't come around as soon. So it's always interesting to see those trends over time. And that's everything that I have. And I mean, I have mountains more info, but just to try and keep it to something reasonable, this is a good thumbnail view. And if anybody ever has questions or would like to know or like to see this data, let me know. I'm happy to share it or talk about it. And
all right. So yeah. I'm going to burn through some questions that people had a lot of stuff. I'm also going to, I mentioned earlier in the comments that there's some other folks with stats. His Majesty Midrealm has a number of stats, both on society membership and things like that, that I'd like to make sure we post up or maybe even have another episode. I know Helga has a number of stats, especially I believe she has a number of stats around female knights and chivalry around the SCA. And I'm seriously interested in knowing that one. So we'll talk to her and find a good time for her to be able to maybe present that. And try to build another program around that. But it was funny. We were talking about too old to become a knight, and Antigone brought up the point of maybe not. One thing is we do hear it once in a while, and again, it's usually from their friends. But I do hear, and it's not so much too young; it's not mature enough, which is fundamentally which can mean too young. I've heard that a number of times, and I think that's harder because we don't associate as well. We don't know the culture, younger culture as well. The average age of knights in the society now, we have many more older, been around for a long time, that just don't understand that culture. And I think in many ways, it's something that those knights need to watch. I know for me, when I bring this up all the time, we are lucky enough in the society to have a culture that allows older people to interact with younger people. And we always, culturally, we think, oh, well, that older person's going to help the younger person. But that's a two-way road if you want it to be. And it's incredibly beneficial because there are stuff culturally right now. I thank God I have young people in our group that I'm like, okay, what is this thing? Right. And they make fun of me and it's all fun. But man, I get a chance to learn and I get a chance to learn about the modern culture. And I think that's really important. Not only for me important because I don't want to be in a box. Here's my old person box sitting up here and then everybody else is doing their thing. It's the more you can stay engaged with cultures, and I'm never going to be a young person to understand everything, but the more we can stay engaged, the more we can understand them, the more, we can make better decisions in our order. And I think that's something that all the knights really need to take a hard look at.
Yeah, I want to just build on that. So currently the youngest knight in the kingdom lives in my group. It's Sir Drengi Svensson. He's 20. He was knighted. He was 25, 6. He's been a knight a few years now, or he was 24. But his perspective on not just culture, but the order and knighting, and it's really different. And because he has a funny work schedule, I threw together a Sunday practice so that we could get together and fight. But the conversation sometimes is more useful, even more useful than the fighting, to get some of us older folks in touch with what's going on. And his perspectives at his age are very different, maybe, than what mine are. I'm long, and I mean, I'm looking at another 10 years in the workforce and retire out, and he's just getting started building his life. And so it's really interesting to have him, get advice from somebody literally 20, 30 years younger than me. But it's like you said, Brannos, it's really good to have those people.
And I tell you, I also love it because I get a chance to interact with the same type of thing here on the show, right? I could be like, wow, I had to walk up hill both ways and snowstorms and blah, 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 like many people do. But, I tell you what, maybe I had it easier back then than they do now. In many ways, I think I had. And yes, I mean, we traveled a lot and we did all of those things. But like you said, gas was 3 times less then. And money was worth more then. And we can just keep naming the things. Here's another example of why it takes so long. It's because as you get older, you start having families and kids and things like that. Everybody's like, well, why don't you carpool? Well, it's pretty hard to carpool with your family, with somebody else. You can't do that. It's pretty hard to call somebody up and say, hey, can me and all the kids stay at your place? Right? I mean, and I've heard that from older members because they were like, well, when I was doing this, I carpooled and stayed, at people's houses. Yeah, that works great. But, we're not talking about 20-year-olds anymore. Well, and we should be, but in this case, we are not. And
there's also nothing
I think
to do back then. You guys had 3 channels, and one of them was the Love Boat, and that sucked.
But I think there's a lot of these things that need to be not only talked about here, but socialized more everywhere, because I think and I would tell you, I'm still having a hard time getting a grip to it, because maybe I'm just constantly looking for more stuff because I redefined what I thought chivalry was over the last over the last 30 some years. And that's not fair necessarily, right? Now, it doesn't mean that we can't advance the order to be better or change the order to fit the modern times. But I'm not sure we are the ones that should dictate fitting the order to the modern times. So,
and hopefully these stats that we're presenting are the gateway to conversations, that they help create some space to talk about these things in, as a way to get a conversation going.
Yeah. And I think that's a big part. I just wanted, there's another one here I'm going to throw up here. And I think this is an important one. I think a couple of us probably could answer this. And Barry, I'd like to hear what you have to say on it. I will bring one person's name up here, and he wasn't at the corners of the kingdom. Although I have talked to others lately that are, and it is harder. But he only had 1 weekend a month available to him to go to any events outside of our area. And, he was knighted. He made that weekend. He would never travel with us. He would go to some weird event somewhere and fight that 1 weekend he had off, and then come home. And then he'd sometimes show up at an event late because he worked during the day at closer events. But he made that 1 weekend he had off, and he went somewhere, and he came to fight practices, and he made time to do stuff, and he made Penzic. He used his vacation to do some things that he wanted to do here and there. And he was knighted, and that was wrongful. It was an interesting conversation when he was fighting in Crown. Same thing. He was still working that job. And I pointed out to him, there's 2 people that, win Crown, and, him and his lady, and this culture of 3-4 events of Crown in our kingdom and many others is a hard culture to live in. And he was worried about it. But, I think you can figure it out, but you have to make the effort to figure it out. Find the events, work your day off on the events that are most important if you can. If you do have a day off and there's not something local or something you would normally go to something you don't normally go to. No better way to be seen. So geographically difficult, but not impossible.
Yeah. To add to that, a couple of things. Like you said, you have to figure it out. So part of that's going to be reaching out to somebody who knows how to figure it out, having good advocates in your area. So in our area right now, the southern part of the East Kingdom is not one of the more active areas relative to some of the more hot spots. But we're working on building that up, and Canada is sort of the same boat. And I talked to some of the Canadians, and part of it is not just, don't try to figure it out on your own. Like, talk to people that have done this. So one of the things I tell people in our kingdom, I said, in our region, I said, look, we got numbers. This is about how many yes votes you need to get knighted. Okay, this is after you've gotten good enough, all right, or when you've gotten close to being good enough, because you have to be good enough, right? If you're not a peer level, then it doesn't make a difference. But once you're getting close to that, I tell them, okay, this is how many knights we have in our region. You need to know them, and that's not enough votes. And one of the things I say specifically, you live in Philadelphia, I tell them the path through chivalry goes through Nutley. Nutley is one of our famous, known world renowned practices. I was like, it's in New York City. It's at the hub of the kingdom. I was like, at a minimum, you need to go get FaceTime up there. One, it'll make you a better fighter, but two, if you get them to believe in you, that's going to help a lot. So there's like one example. I'm sure in other parts of the kingdom, there may be some other big, we have the police athletic league practice in the Boston area. That's another one. So there's little things like that, little key events you need to go to, or it might be something as simple as, hey, go to Penzic, but don't just hang out with your household. Go to this party. Make sure you show up to these meetings. Try to get on to some sort of like sergeant command team or something. Go to the command meetings. Little keys you can do to go make those sort of social connections. And again, that's assuming that you are near a peer level to start making those connections to make sure and you know what? I hate it. Wasn't bad once I did it. It's not that I hate playing that game. It's that you hate that you have to play that game. You think that like, I should just be good enough and people should just know it. And that should be all it takes. And it's not, So that's my thought on that.
No, I think it's a great thought. Hey, and William, here's another example of that. Wasn't it you that took a vacation and traveled to a practice every day through your vacation or something like that? Was that you? Somebody did that. They took like a week of vacation and they worked it out that they traveled from one practice to the next practice to the next practice.
So that was our friend Wolfgang von den Lohen.
That's who it was.
Yeah, Wolfgang. So Wolfgang von den Lohen was a knight. He was knighted, right after us, or right with us.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, right, you were the prince. You put your hand on the sword. But he lived 5 hours north of Manitoba. And I remember he came to Crown in Dayton. And he was out on the field, and I didn't know him, so I'm outgoing. And so I went over and asked him who he was. And he said he and two of his buddies tag team drove a Nissan Sentra 29 hours to get down to Crown. But when he would go to Penzic, he would take we'd take a week for Penzic, and he would take a week in front of Penzic and come down through what is now North Shield, and he would hit a practice every night on his way to Penzic, and then he would do the same on the way home. Because sometimes one of those times he swung out down south to come to the Flaming Griffin practice, and I remember we all went up to King Rene. You were Prince, Garlanda was Queen, and yeah, I was just stunned that, but there was a guy who really wanted to, get it done and get out there and fight and meet people, do that social part Barry was talking about. And he did. And he was great.
Yeah. I tell them something that my knight told me, which is, I'll paraphrase what he told me, or at least the way I interpret it. It was like, I tell the guys, like, go out and fight these people. I was like, and don't worry about losing to them. I was like, it's just fight. We're fighters. We communicate with our hands and our sticks. I was like, if somebody fights you and beats you 9 out of 10 times, but just generally has a good fight with you, they're going to have a very positive feeling about you. Again, if you're good enough, you're like, they have a very positive feeling about you. We about ready to move on to the last bit of data here?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
And just let our audience know it's 9:07. We're not getting through this in 23 minutes, so we're going over. Just so let your dog out now. Feed the chickens, whatever you have to do. Yeah, so this is a poll I took. Go ahead, next slide, please. Oh, by the way, I'm going to provide a link. I'm not going to bother in this because we got, thanks for participating, everybody. We got 1 billion comments. So on the YouTube version, I'll put a link maybe in the about section or in the poll there. I'm actually going to have a link to all the data here. So real quickly, yeah, so when we're looking at data, we can only get so much insight out of data. Side note, I don't have quite the history of data with Count William, but I do work as a data scientist. So that's part of where I come from with this stuff. So I made these little motivational posters right here. So one small change won't make a difference. So for example, one Pell workout is not going to be the difference between you getting knighted or not knighted, but several small changes will. And I have a picture of an F1 racer here because I actually heard this quote from a racing fan that was like, yeah, if you change one steel bolt to a titanium bolt on a Formula racing car, it's not going to make a difference. But if you change all the bolts, then you start to see these differences. So we're talking about all these like little changes that sort of stack up over time. But having said that, it's more important to shave off pounds than it is to shave off ounces. So you still want to look for the big picture things here. And then next slide. And then this one is just be careful when you're analyzing correlations. And here's one that shows a graph of the global temperatures rising as the number of pirates have been reducing over the last several hundred years. So therefore, we conclude that it's the pirates. We need to get more pirates in the oceans to reduce the global temperature. And obviously, that's not the case. That's a completely unrelated correlation. So generally speaking, the data should either support or challenge what we understand. So either it's going to support like, oh yeah, we all figured practicing more was going to make you better. Or maybe if there's some big thing out there that says like, oh, maybe it doesn't make as big of a difference as we think it does. Avoid coming up with wacky theories to explain odd trends. I've even fell victim of that as I did this study. I came up with some really crazy theory for like why being good at lots of things wasn't as important as being good at a few things. And it turns out I made a copy and paste error in my formula. And I was an hour into this wacky theory I had. And I learned that in my job 10 years ago when I had a big wacky theory for, it was a data error. So anyway, statistics can only tell us so much, and nothing will account for individuality. So we can come up with trends, but some people don't respond well to Pell work. Some people can practice once a month and just visualizing on their own, or maybe they're really athletic. So there's going to be a lot of individuality. Next, and I'm going to get through the next couple slides pretty quickly, and then we can here we go. This was just a real quick, rough idea. William had some different numbers here. As we said, we don't really know what percentage of people become knights. I did look at the 3 local kingdoms to me, and about 10% do get peerages. So I looked at the order precedence. If you got any award, about 10% do become peers. I can only guess that knights are going to be in a similar sort of range, although I think you said it could be as small as 2.5%. So it's hard to say. In these 3 areas, twice as many people who receive a grant of arms in heavy fighting compared to people who receive peerages. But it turns out we found out that's not true in the mid-realm. And I did look at the data. It looks like you guys are almost closer to like a 1-to-1 ratio.
Closing in on it anyways.
Yeah. And then I have here, at least in the East, we have 17% of our active fighters are chivalry. How do you define someone as being active? I remember going through the list of Shiv. I'm like, oh, that guy has a authorization card, but I haven't seen him in 4 years, So, but just to give you some like very like rough ideas of about how many people become knights. So this is about the worst data I have, just so you know. I just want to kind of start off with this. Next slide. So I sent a poll out a year ago and sat on this data for a year because it was just a mountain of data I was afraid to go through. It was 30 questions. There's a couple of super secret Facebook pages that you guys don't know about if you're not knights that exist out there that I posted these polls on. We had 348 that responded. There's 30 questions. Don't want to dwell too much on this, but you say most of the known world responded. The only thing I really want to get out of this is that I would love to do a kingdom by kingdom breakdown, but the numbers, like I could look at Avicall, 4 people responded. I can't get reliable trends on that. But when I compile it all together, I think that the trends are pretty reliable. Even with the East Kingdom at 46 and Antir at 40, that's still not enough to make comfortable trends. There were some cases where I did draw some conclusions on numbers that small, but it's again, the less data you have, the less reliable it is, but it might still give you some insight. Next slide. This is the era of elevation that people responded. So more recently, more people responded, and that's just because they're more likely to be active, and they're certainly more likely to have a social media account. So about 3/4 were 2010 and the 2000s, and then another big chunk in the 90s. And then thanks to everyone that responded to this who got knighted in the 80s or 70s. It was very insightful, but I ended up throwing that data out. mostly, because I think people want to know not what would I need to do if I jumped in a time machine and went back to 1985 to get knighted. They want to know, what do I need to get knighted this year or next year or in the next 10 years? Next slide. And this is what it looks like when I throw out those 2 decades. And so now we're down to 289 respondents. I think it's still pretty good size, and that goes from 1990 to 2022. And there's your actual numbers there: 53 in the 90s, 67, 181. Next slide. And then this is what it looks like. Again, this is going to be up, so if you want to take the time to look at this later, you can. And then next slide. Okay, here we go. Some insights. I thought this was interesting. So about 4% of the respondents were female. 96% were male. I think maybe 1 or 2 said, I'd rather not say. I didn't get any non-binary responses that I'm aware of. And then on handedness, about 12% were left-handed and 83% were right-handed. Then 5% said both. And what I find interesting on this is that the left-handed response is very close to how many people in our general population is left-handed. Later on, you will see that there is a slight advantage toward getting knighted being left-handed. Everyone believes that there's an advantage being left-handed because we're not used to it. There is. It's not huge, though. It's not like a left-handed person is going to get knighted in 5 years and a right-handed person is going to take 10 years. Or that twice as many lefties are going to get knighted. There's small advantages. And I think I've heard some dukes say that, and maybe you guys can say this. You guys are more accomplished fighters than I am, but it's like it seems like it's a bigger advantage at the lower levels. Once you start getting up to your, competing for crown levels, like you guys have enough experience to kind of know how to handle lefty. Does that sound right? That at least the advantages kind of diminish as you get up there?
You're on mute, Brannos.
Muted, Brannos.
You think I've been doing this long enough? I'd learn how. Anyways, I think the big piece is yes, there is later on, it doesn't matter quite as much, but it still does matter because you get a lot more practice against, if you're at a practice and you're one of 2 left-handers and there's 10 people there, you get 8 people to fight that's right-handed, where we get 2 people to fight that's left-handed. So the more practice and the more you see something, the more you can understand and break it down. So there's still some advantage in that scenario. The only way to take that away is to make sure that you get, that you get that extra practice, or that you try to specifically learn about those things. For me, I was lucky enough that I trained Wrongvaulter, right? And so I majority of practice, a lot of times, it would be fighting him, and in that time frame at the time, we were almost, there were lots of practices that we were 50-50 at knights and right-hander, left-handers. So my game, came up that way, but I can absolutely, if you don't see something all the time, you're still gonna, no matter where you are in the game, it does decrease, but you're not as efficient as the person that gets it all the time.
Yeah, I would just build on that. Had a left-handed squire brother who got knighted, took a left-handed squire. There are 2 left-handed fighters in our barony. One of them is Count Sir Cadogan, and he just had his shoulder fixed, and he'll be back. But the other one is our youngest knight, Sir Drengi. He's a lefty, and I get to fight him all the time, and I count myself lucky because I agree with Brannos. I think a left-handed fighter will always see more right-handed fighters than a right-handed fighter sees left-handed fighters. I think that's how you said it, or that was your intent, right?
Yeah.
If you don't make a serious effort to fight lefties, and a lot of people avoid them, which is that's no good. That doesn't work.
Yeah, it's like avoiding Matus or two-stick or whatever, right?
Right.
If you don't go do it and don't compete against it, then it's going to be more difficult to fight it when you have to in the future.
Yeah.
Hey, next slide. Here's the weapons forms. And again, this is all the Shiv that responded. So let's look at the top here. Primary weapons forms. About 73% sword and shield. No big surprises there. 20%, 19% great weapon. No big surprises. 8% 2-weapon. I'm a 2-weapon primary. And I'm really a spear melee primary, but it's become 2-weapon in singles in the last couple of years. On the left side, weapons depth. So about 24% say that they are one form primary, and we see that out there, people that fight sword and shield, and that's their thing. That's usually probably more sword and shield fighters than anything if they only have one form. And then I have roughly, a quarter, say somewhat multiform, a quarter multiform, and 18% very multiform. And on the right side here, the question was, were you considered chivalry level at singles or melee? So this one I find interesting. So 8% say singles only. And we all know those people that just kick butt in singles and then they got melee and they really didn't know what they were doing, but it didn't seem to hold them back. They got knighted anyway. It seems like most people kind of do a little bit of both. We got both singles and melee. And then we got a small amount that was mostly melee, but good at singles. That certainly identified that was myself when I got knighted. I think I've gotten a lot better in singles in the last year and a half, but I was primarily a melee fighter. And I think in the East Kingdom, in the mid realm particularly, I'm assuming the mid realm, since we're melee kingdoms with the biggest melee event, there's a lot of value to making those unbelt teams, and it looks good. But here's the one key I will say. Notice that even though it's 8% is singles only, it is 0% melee only. It's very, very hard, if not impossible, to be just a melee fighter with no singles prowess. And in fact, when I finally made it known that I'd be interested in being knighted, I had a couple of people come out and say, like, can you show people that you can fight singles, because that's really going to help.
Yeah, and I think I just posted something up, and at least in our kingdom, it's not that you have to fight every style, but they want you to be dangerous at least. You need to understand. One of my rounds in my last crown, I fought a polearm person that's actually from my practice as well, but in the finals, much taller guy than me, longer polearm, but I still won, and it was mostly because I understood range, timing, and control. If you understand those things, that crosses that weapon barrier in many cases. So just beware that you don't, yes, in our kingdom at least, they want to see you being able to use other weapons. But really, in the end, they really also want to know that you're just dangerous in general when you're out in the field and understand how the fight builds. And we've knighted people that never won tournaments. We've knighted people. So there's no one thing that we can say, that we don't do. And if there is something that we haven't done, don't be surprised if it happens some point, right? So, because times change. But yes, we would like to see people have more than one weapon style. But I've seen a lot of people that have more than one weapon style a couple times and still get knighted.
Yeah.
And I was just going to add with our little bit of a shift in crown where we're having finals with more weapons forms. There's been more interest. We will run at our practice a great weapon bear pit at the end of practice to try and get some of that. And we still don't see a ton of two-stick fighters like the old days. But even it's starting to pick back up. So I think some of the things like that, the crown tourney, what you're going to need to win a crown drives the behavior of the fight population to some degree.
Yeah, well, so I got an interesting insight here. It might be on the next slide, actually. Next slide, please. Well, it's going to come in a bit, so we'll get back to that. So here is one. I thought this was a big one. Did you hold an official position before your elevation? So 91% of the people who got knighted said they did hold an official position. Most of that was marshal, and about half were knight marshals, half were event autocrats. So to anyone who's listening, who's not a knight, and is interested in becoming a knight, I highly recommend you go get at least some official position. That sends a really good message to the order that you're more than just a person that shows up to fight. And again, I know when I was on the other side of the fence, it's like you look at these things as like these stupid little hoops that people are just making you jump through. And it really is just about a perception about, are you a knightly person or are you not a knightly person? And even if you have somebody that is just blowing everyone away with what they're fighting. You know, they're like, just please go be a marshal an event somewhere. And even with those, I usually recommend people, it's like, you don't have to show them that you're willing to give up your favorite event just to marshal. Just show up. If you don't like tourney, show up and marshal a tourney. And if you don't like melee, show up and marshal melee. Or like I did, I got Lyme disease. I showed up and marshaled events when I couldn't fight. And apparently I was told that made a very good impression rather than just disappearing, you know, until I got better. Next slide. Where are we? Slide 15. Okay. I thought this one was interesting. How good were you at elevation? Now, again, this is self-reported. This is people's own opinions of themselves. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. Only 9% say they could not beat half the nights half the time. We have a big chunk, 34%, saying that they could beat half the nights half the time. I know, I've always heard the old adage, to become a knight, you need to beat half the nights half the time. And here, almost 2/3 are saying they had to be better than that. And I think I heard someone say in one of the Coaches Corners episodes that you beat half the nights half the time, that gets you the interview. Like, that's the resume, that gets you the interview. And now they want to know, well, is that all you can do? Or what else can you do? If you're a very well-rounded person, and you have, again, great ANS, you got great service, you've got the amazing peer-like qualities, that's probably all you need to do. A lot of times people get there and there's a lot of maybe finishing you need to do. Do you guys have comments on that at all?
I've had a marshal's warrant since 1990. I consider it to be the single most important piece of paper I ever got. It allowed me to serve when I was unable, to help in my local group, and visiting other groups. I couldn't tell you the number of times where, I mean, again, the cadre of folks that was traveling around that time when Brannos and I have been friends since before we were even squires, but we got our marshal's warrants in there. And you'd show up someplace and they might not have a marshal. And we'd have some paperwork and we'd step in, and sometimes tag team, or, you know, amongst us, there was probably about 15 or 20 of us who were all like that. And so I think that's a pretty minimum requirement. Yeah. I want to see somebody have a marshal's warrant, but if somebody is also autocrating events or feastocrating, or, you know, supporting the ANS, if they're doing scribe, we have a knight in our barony who loves to do scribal stuff, and he gives away scrolls. Those are all pretty important things in my mind.
Okay. Oh, well, real quick. So that was actually on the last question about having the marshal it or something like that. And so on this one was, how good were you at the time of your elevation? As I said, 2/3 had to, about 1/3 where I could beat half the nights half the time. And then we have 2/3 that wasn't good enough. A lot of people said they had to beat most of the nights half the time, and even 18% said they had to beat most of the nights most of the time. So that's sort of, I guess the question is, what level of prowess do you need? And it's wondering what you guys thought about that. You know, if you have even had that metric in your head, or
I'll let Brannos take that one. He was way better fighter than me.
Wait, what's that? Say that again. I'm answering a question, but, you know, I'm going to answer it online because it's getting long. But anyway, say what was your question?
Well, so here we have a how good were you at elevation? And as I said before, that we used to have this old saying, you had to beat half the nights half the time. And
I that's a hard, you know, if you really take that, it's like, okay, I have to beat half the nights. So let's count half the nights off. We have 100 nights. I only have to beat 50 of them, and only 50% of the time.
Yeah.
So really, there's like 25% that I need to be able to beat all the time, right? Or something to that effect, right? I know there's an average in there. To me, it's almost a little too hard to understand. Also, judging yourself is in that position. Terrible, if you don't understand it, it's hard to actually come up with could really answer that. You know?
I've known some people that were like, "Hey, man, I'm there. I'm beating half the nights half the time. How come I'm not knighted yet?" And I'm like, "Well, that's, as I said earlier, it's like that gets you the interview
again,
but that's not all you need.
There is no checkbox.
Yeah,
and this is and let's go through this for everyone. There's somebody asked, and I was answering this, and it was getting long, and then you asked me a question. So they asked, why is ANS a thing for the knighthood? And I think we covered a lot of that with, well, why is service a thing, and being a marshal or being something else, or why is thinking about how others view, something different than you do now. It's being broad enough to understand things is a very big part of being, a knight as well. We made a little joke that I get done at rum, which is very strange because probably back then I was doing leather work and brewing and stuff.
You were doing a lot of brewing.
A lot of people
awesome.
I think a lot of it was people just did stuff, and a lot of people wouldn't even conclude the stuff they're doing as ANS, but it is art service. But it is, I think it's important. I've had squires that get knighted that didn't do a lot in ANS, but they went to ANS competitions. They looked at the items. They talked with ANS people. They went and helped set up the ANS areas before. Because if you move, and there's an example of this, Sir Yorleaf, if you move into the middle of nowhere where there is nothing, the SCA is still made of arts, sciences, and martial activities. And if you're missing a piece of it, then you're not really doing the whole SCA. You don't have to be a master at doing arts. What you have to do is be able to point people to other people. Like, you come for me for sewing, I got bad news. I'm going to point you to my wife. Or if you come to me for some other singing, I'm going to point you to William. If if you're totally outside the arts, you don't even have that ability to help somebody. So that's why I think it's important. But there's other ones like, hey, you have to know how to play a period game. Hey, you have to know how to dance. Hey, you have to know how to serve head table or cut the meat at head table. I've seen those as questions too. Back when I got knighted, those were questions. I did a lot of dancing but I had a lot of fun doing it. So
I would just mention too, I remember once Count Jafar, we were at a Scribble symposium. My wife was very active in Scribble, so I went to see what I could do to help. But at the end of the evening, he was sweeping the floors. And I mentioned to him, hey, it was good to see him. We were all friends. And he said, yeah, he says, I don't really have an art, but I can help. And I thought that made an impression on me, some of those kind of comments. It's like, yeah, I can help. I don't have to do the art at the event if that's not my skill, but I can sure help set up chairs and take them down and point people at, one thing you get for being in the SCA forever is I might not have a skill you want, but I know who does. And I can point you to them and make that connection for somebody who maybe couldn't make it on their own. That's valuable stuff in the structure, like Brannos said, of the big society where, what we're trying to do is connect people to people.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, let's move on. And as I said, we are going to go over. We are already over by a minute. Okay, median years elevation. I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's very similar to the mid realm. There's some differences in the numbers here because I did first time in armor to elevation, whereas William's numbers were AOA to elevation. And obviously those are easier to find out or I should say that those you can find out because they're on databases online versus this one was a poll. So I can ask people directly how long it took. So these numbers are gonna be a little bit longer. Now, as I said here, I cut out the 70s and 80s out of the rest of this presentation just because the 70s and 80s were so much different. I could have even cut out the 90s, but I kind of wanted a little more data points.
By 2050, everybody will have to have 20 years in.
There you go.
Yep.
But
5 events.
But
Yep.
our medical technology is going to be so good that they'll be getting knighted at 75.
This killing me. I know.
All right, next slide.
Keep going.
How long to elevation? So this one I broke down. And by the way, if I was getting paid to do this and actually could spend 80 to 120 hours doing this whole presentation for my job, I would have done first quartile and third quartiles for everything. I would have done every different kind of stat, but we had to sort of simplify it for this presentation. So 25% of all people got knighted within 8 years, 50% got knighted in under 12 years, and 75% got knighted in 18 years. Nope. Yeah, I did not provide the averages, Jay. Just the medians. So anyway, number of practices. That was another one I wanted to grab. So that's something to think about. And sort of what inspired me on this, again, was a couple of knights I knew they got knighted very quickly, but they were practicing a lot. And also, I'm trying to drive a couple of people in my local practice to say, like, hey, you're practicing like on average about once a month. That's about 10 practices a year. And if it takes about 700 practices to become a knight, that's 70 years, and this is kind of like what I really want to get out of this presentation is let people know you need to get those practices in. Like once you get there, then you can talk about what are you doing at practice, but you have to get to the practice first. Consistent practicing. So here I have 400 at the first quartile, 700, and then 1100, 75% took about 1100 practices. And then the rest of the trends, I did trends on both years and practices just to kind of get two sort of different metrics to see if they're trending in the direction or not. And then I looked at tournaments. I ended up not doing much more with the tournaments throughout the rest of this presentation, but I was just sort of curious. And, the more tournaments you do, the better you get at them, the more people see you. I was I think of the entire 300 and something 90 people that responded to this, I think I had the lowest or second lowest number of tournaments. I think I was at 5 tournaments before I got knighted. But I'm an exception. I'm an exception.
It's worth mentioning, though. I always tell people, I said, practice once a week, every week, 50 out of 50, 48 weeks a year. That should be your minimum standard of practice if you can manage it. Pick an extra up here and there, like you said, building towards that number. You should be practicing weekly. I mean, everybody's going to miss a week here and there for sure.
Yeah.
But consistent practice is what drove most of us. And 40 tournaments, man, I think we did that in 3 years on the pro tour.
Yeah.
It felt like it. It felt like it anyways.
Yeah, well, that varied from kingdom to kingdom too. Like some of the guys out west, one person said they fought like a tournament every weekend for like 10 years or something. Like that's really hard to do out here on the east. Real quick, so Saib had a question here. Were those tournament wins? No, those are just tournament participations. You entered 40 tournaments, before you got knighted. You entered 75 tournaments. And something I've gotten better at, as I've explained to our local unbelts, I tell them if they're not very good or they're feeling bad about a tournament, I said, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go to that tournament, and you may lose. You may do a horrible job, and we're going to call that a baseline. You're going to do that. We're going to get a baseline, and then a year from now, you're going to go to a tournament. You're going to get 2 wins, and we're going to compare where you were at this tournament to where you are in the future as you get better. And I've even, so I try to give them like little, not to tell them you like go in there and expect to lose, but just like be okay with losing. Like don't let that eat you up. And I say that ironically because that's exactly why I didn't do tournaments. Next slide. Yeah, this one was interesting. So I was looking at everyone. So let's look at the top chart there, top table, 8, 12, and 18, and then lefties, 5.5, 10.5, and 14. So it's not a huge difference, but it is a significant difference. So yes, it is. Lefties do seem to have a little bit of an advantage. Then someone asked earlier about female. I only had 11 female respondents. So there's going to be a large margin of error. But of the female respondents, same sort of ballpark to get knighted. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's just as easy for a woman to get knighted as is for a man, because we know, I think most of us of the knights, the female knights, we know that they're mostly badasses, like they're really impressive people. But that's what the data showed. I want to throw that up there. And then the bottom half, as I said, I kind of also looked at number of practices just to see if we see similar trends. And again, significant advantages for being a lefty, but not overwhelming. And then the women, and I wasn't sure what I was going to saw when I did this. I was actually kind of expecting to see there's going to be much longer and much more practices for the women. But my gut says that that why we see so few women knights. Oh God, that's a loaded question. I don't want to answer that.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd go there, but
but I will say that
I think for a couple of pieces here, culturally it was difficult early off in the 70s and 80s. In fact, that was very difficult in the 70s. As you can ask people like Fern and others when they weren't allowed to fight. But we also had in society, sports were difficult in those times for women as well.
Yeah.
So the active sports, being physical, aggressive sports that women were allowed to participate in hasn't really been a thing that long. So that holds this scenario back a little bit. Also the numbers, the numbers makes it hard. And right back to not knowing or being able to understand what they feel compared to what we feel, because it's two different things, right? And it's hard to, essentially judge. It's like, well, they didn't show up to practice. Well, there's probably maybe reasons why they didn't show up to practice.
Yeah,
a lot of women got caught in
maybe people are driving them out, right? Maybe there's like a
right. We had people driving them out. We still have people driving them out. They don't even know they're driving them out.
Yeah.
We have a cultural problem with, who takes care of the kids still, and all of these things. There's lots of layers on that. The great part is it seems to be to me, especially because there's such hard work by a lot of people, but a lot of the lady fighters in the society, is that in the last number of years, I have learned an incredible amount from them, and I appreciate them helping me understand better.
Yeah. Well, like I said, the numbers don't tell us everything. I certainly wouldn't want to take this and run away and go like, oh, it's easier to become a knight if you're a woman than you're a man. But I did just want to get the numbers out there. I just want to show what the data showed. And probably if Helga does a presentation in the future, we'll probably get a lot more insight into it. Next slide. Practice frequency. This is the big obvious one. People that practice less than every other week. Now, again, these are averages. So, for example, I was on the less than every other week train because my total time was 29 years. That included 10 years of doing jack diddly. I did triathlons and I was in a heavy metal band for 10 years. But that's just over the course of 29 years. That's why it took me so long to get knighted, because even though I got it in about 350 practices, it took me that long to do it. So the more you practice, there's very big trends here. The more you practice. I did find this interesting. The once a weeks compared to the twice a weeks, compared to the significantly more than twice a week. Count William said earlier, once a week's a good target. I mean, more than once a week, some people respond very well to that, but I think that once a week target, at least for our hobby, again, we're not a professional sport. People aren't doing this 2 hours a day, and they're not all 20 years old, and we're not getting paid for it. That seems to be a pretty good target. Next one. How much Pell work? Okay, this one I found interesting. So this one and the trends are going to be interesting. So we have a full 25% said none. Zilch, zero, never did Pell work or almost never did Pell work. The next quarter there that say some Pell work. And again, I actually had this, I just basically said if it was less than 15 minutes a week, or actually if it was like less than 7 minutes a week, I calculated some. Largely, those were people who said they would use the Pell to work out a new shot. And then once they kind of got it down, they never went back to the Pell. So these are some nights will just be like, I've been Duke Dietrich showed me that weird thing where he comes in and throws the back edge sort of thing in the armpit. I want to try that out, and they'll work it out for a couple of weeks. And then once they get it down, or once they decide they don't want to do it, they won't go back to the Pell. Versus I'm more of I view the Pell like I view scales on a piano, where it's like you go out there and you keep doing it to keep everything sharp. So I do Pell work pretty regularly. And then past, half the people do anywhere from 15 minutes a week up to a whole lot more than that. Next slide. And these were the trends to how long it took to get knighted. And we have, in terms of, this one shows like a small trend in terms of number of practices. You see the little graph on the bottom left there. There's a trend line drawn. The overall trend was not big, but we do see that the people that did no Pell work averaged 825 practices until their knighthood. And then everyone after that was significantly less than that. And then if you look at the median number of years, 13 years for people that did no Pell work at all. And then everyone, the more and more Pell work they did, it seemed like the quicker and quicker they got. To me, as a rough interpretation of 300 respondents self-reporting what they believe they did, this tells me that Pell work, it's not going to be the huge difference, but I think it is going to make a difference. And the rule of thumb, I actually have some rules of thumb I threw at the end of this presentation, but what I tell people at practice is like, look, every practice expect to get 1% better. And the reason why I say 1% better is don't expect one practice to make this huge jump. It's lots of one practices that make the huge jump. And I say for Pell work, every Pell work makes you 0.1% better, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you do 7 Pell workouts a week, that equals about a practice a week. That's the way I look at it. There's small little differences, but they do add up.
Quick question, Barry. So in your data, there's a question on the side about what constitutes practice. And we could have a whole conversation. I know a lot of people who go to practice and don't practice very much. So, and it might be worth just kind of put it out there as something to talk about a little bit.
Yeah, so I answered that question, and but first I'm at Barry. I mean, I guess this goes back to what, you know, a lot of times we do polls and we don't define what the you know, what some things are very well. So we come in with too many people maybe having different understanding of the question. Like, what is a practice? Is that a practice somewhere where you go do footwork and pelt work all day? Is that practice? Is sitting here and understanding our game, our the understanding around being knighted and being talked about, you know, essentially seeing these numbers about going to practice and things like that, and learning practice is meditation practice is. So, you know, there's a lot. For me, it's mind, body, soul, right? It's I tell people, somebody be like, I'm practice. I want to win crown. I hate that vibe, but I get it. The first thing they're like, I'm going to go do 2 or 3 practices, fighting practices a week. And I'm like, that's great. So what are you doing to physically make yourself stronger? Because practice doesn't always physically make yourself stronger. You know, and having better, you know, being stronger at the things that we need helps you be a better fighter. And then I ask, what are you doing for your mind? Are you reading? Are you watching videos? Are you reviewing videos? Are you having your videos reviewed? Again, as important as going to a fighting practice. So to me, that's practice. All of those are practices.
I was just going to add, so for myself, what I think about physical practice, and I agree with Brannos 100%. I think I do more stuff like cardio. If you were to total up all the amount of time I spend doing cardio, I would suspect in a given week with regular practice schedule, I'm probably on the treadmill more than I'm actually fighting in armor, just because of the limitations of practice and evenings and such. But in a 2-hour practice window, which is typical for a lot of practices, my goal is to try and get either what I would say is half of that time physically in armor swinging the stick, or a minimum of 50 passes. And 50 doesn't sound like a lot, but switch up weapons, get 50, 60 passes in a 2-hour window. That's pretty good. But then I'm doing half an hour of treadmill a day just to maintain. And I probably could do more than that. And I'm certainly could be doing more.
So on this one, the question, so I had 30 questions. This question was specifically worded: how many singles and or melee practices did you participate in before your elevation? And I had other questions in there about cardio and strength and power work and stuff like that. So it's self-reporting, so people may interpret it differently. I'll give, and I know Antigone asked this, and I know they do a lot of foam work down in Anstiora at their practice. So as an example, I keep a log of some of my practices. I had a practice last week where we had a female fighter with about a year of experience, who's fighting 2-sword. And we were the only 2 people that showed up at practice. And I said, well, I've got foam weapons. I said, and I brought my Pell and we had some spears. I said, and it was also cold and wet out. I was like, we could do this out of armor, get a lot of stuff out of armor if you want to. And she agreed to do that. And I logged that in as a practice because I felt like I'd done enough to count this. Yep. Like I really worked on some 100%. Things. Yeah, it wasn't just treadmill work. It wasn't just yoga. Like I did some very specific things. Now, again, there's, like you said, what constitutes practice? Some people are very bad practicers. Those people didn't answer this poll because they never got knighted. So, you know, or at least most of them didn't. And that might be a whole other poll, like just talking about what makes a good practice. Because like we had a local practice and we kind of shut down because it just, those of us that were really serious were kind of keeping it going for a handful of people that almost never showed up. And when they did, they would suit up, do 1 round of practice. They wouldn't work on anything, and then they'd take their armor off. And we're like, hey, have fun, guys. This is kind of not, we can put our effort other places.
I think we've all been through that too. And I was going to say, I like foam because you could throw helmets and shields on with no armor and go at it pretty hard with foam and get a great workout. But, you know, if somebody doesn't have armor that fits, you got newer fighters. If you can just get a helmet on them to protect the head and a shield, you can use a foam sword. And I think that's a totally fair practice.
By the way, Sven's responding here about foam. I just want to let Sven know since he's listening. Sven, I finally bought those forged foam weapons, and I'm loving them. They arrived like 2 weeks ago, and so we've been doing a lot with it. It's one thing we did learn from it is that it seems to be better for the defender than the offense person because they don't exactly swing like rattan sticks. But yeah, we're getting a lot out of it, and especially when you're working with a newer fighter, that the part of the learning process is they're going to get hit a lot.
Forged foam makes a great product. I have a bunch.
Yeah. So, I've been sitting around on a half-made sword that needed another hour's worth of work. I was like, screw it. Here's my $75. That's tired. Next slide.
Okay, let's move on.
Yeah. Weapons depth. Oh, this one I found interesting. So this is just a repeat of the other slide. So about 25% were one form. And weapons depth correlation. I found this one interesting. So look at this. The people that were single form got knighted the quickest and in the fewest number of practices. So my thoughts on interpreting this, and again, I'm trying not to get into wacky scenarios, and everyone's an individual. So for example, myself, I was a multi-weapons form fighter. Large reason why I was a multi-weapon form fighter is I first got noticed as a spear fighter, and being a spear fighter is not enough to get knighted in almost any kingdom. So I had to pick up other forms. I also have some injuries I'm working around. So whenever one area would get injured, I would find another weapons form would not bother that injury. So I just kind of fell into being a multi-weapons fighter. But I think ultimately, at least in the Shiv polls that I've been on, the people we talk about are usually the people that pop in big tournaments. And the people that pop in big tournaments are the ones who are best at a singles form. And they're the ones who focused on that singles form. My takeaway from this is not to say, hey, don't work on that multi-weapon stuff, because sometimes that's what people need, just to get a couple more things to round themselves out because they're kind of just under that bar, whatever that nebulous bar is of the 50 to 100 people that are sort of answering that poll. And that's enough to kind of push you over, just kind of shows you're making the effort and that you know other things. But I think the other takeaway from this is I would recommend against spending 25% of your time on sword and shield and 25% of your time on two sword and 25% of your time on polearm, because I think that's really going to drag out how long it takes you to master a weapons form. That's my thoughts on it. I've had weeks to think about this since I finished my study a while ago. Do you guys have any thoughts on that one? Single form versus multi-form. Why do we see that the single form people seem to be getting knighted a little more quickly?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I mean, there's obviously more ideas on the fundamental philosophy side of, be a master at one and essentially
jack of all trades, master of none.
Jack of all trades type stuff. But I think really it does, in our case, it comes down to tournament wins.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's like it's hard to not
perform. It's not just wins, by the way. It's perform.
Yeah, and it's hard to not talk about somebody who just did awesome in a tournament, right? But it's easy to forget somebody who never does awesome in a tournament, right? Doesn't mean that
somebody else posted, and this is a good point. Having to buy gauntlets is a bit of a barrier for multi-weapon as well. So and that's probably another reason.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. All right, next slide. Okay, this one was interesting. Video review, and I remember again, what even inspired this whole study was something that Duke Brennan said several years ago about like the amount of video review he'd done. And I'll tell you, man, I got so much better over the pandemic because I did so much video review. I watch a lot of Brannos' videos, a lot of Avery. Oh, I forget what Avery's going by now. Avery, I call him Avery Alex from Drakenwald, Avery from Drakenwald. Duke Sven's videos. I've gone through like his whole playlist and just going through those videos. I found this. So people that do, and by the way, I think most of the people from the 90s, I just threw their data out because there wasn't much video review to do in the 90s. Not nearly as much as now. Yes.
Sure, you're right. I would say we were. I was an outlier. We owned a video camera. We shot everything, and if you want to be dragged across the coals, nothing compares to watching the Crown tournament you just fought in your hotel room while Duke Palomar does a Mystery Science Theater 3000 review.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So video review includes both watching what other people, like I said, I watch a lot of Duke Sven stuff, and then I also watch my own stuff. By the way, for anyone who's coming up, I'll tell you right now, this is great. Save your videos. And if you ever have a bad practice, you're really depressed, watch a video of yourself from a year earlier, and that'll make you feel better about yourself. Because you realize that you are still improving. Here it is. People that occasionally watch videos to never, 13 years, 700 practices. People that watch videos often, 11 years, 600 practices. So I think there's a definite positive trend there for video review. Again, and like I said, the whole Formula One race card, that might be replacing one bolt with titanium, but if we can do lots of these things, that'll really boost your performance. Next slide. Supplemental fitness. Okay, this one was interesting. So in a nutshell, people that did cardio versus people that did weights. A lot of people don't do weights at all, but most people do something. Let's look at the trends here. And again, I'm rushing through this. You can always go back and read this. And again, I'll have a link on the YouTube channel to this whole presentation. You want to look through it. So next slide, please. We see, I would say not huge trends, but definitely some trends. Let's look at the median number of years. So this is for cardio. People that did no cardio, 12 years. People that did over 3 hours a week of cardio, 10 years. Hey, for a lot of people, they're like, there's no way in hell I'm doing over 3 hours a week. That's fine. I'm a 3 hour week person. I ran college cross country. So that's me. And this might be an area, maybe you do weights instead of cardio. And again, number of practices, but definitely some trends toward the more cardio people do, kind of the better they do. And actually, one of the things I've noticed for myself, not so much now at 50 years old, it's my joints that are limiting me, but 10 years ago, it was the cardio that limited me in practice. And when I would do my cardio, I could get 20 extra passes in practice. So it's
that's
not
what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
It's not like the cardio itself made me better. It allowed me to practice more, and the practicing more made me better.
They keep the quality of that practice up so you're not gasping for air. That's kind of how I look at it. I can get better fights and get more of them.
Yeah.
And that's where the real help is.
Yeah. And honestly, if I did another poll today, well, if I was just going to poll Sir Bari, it would be, how does doing your PT stretches consistently affect yourself? And now that's what's keeping me practicing more, is my shoulder PT. Next one, strength, the same thing. There's definitely some trends. Now, again, median number of years, no real difference from 0 to 3, but then over 3, significant difference. And that kind of makes sense. 3 hours a week in the weight room. I think this is sort of separating your Duke Dietrichs and your Sir Hugos, these really jacked, buff gym rats that are just super athletic and overwhelm you with their athleticism. But I think I should throw Duke Sven in there too, another super jacked plumber that can overwhelm you with his athleticism. Some positive trends there. And again, what I really liked out of this whole polling was that we're seeing positive trends where we should expect to see them, like the data supporting what we know. We know lifting weights makes you better. We know pel work makes you better. We know practicing makes you better. We know video review makes you better. And the data kind of seems to support that. Next slide. This one was interesting. Interactions with chivalry. So I had number of chiv in your area. And what I was getting at this one was like, do you live in an area where the people that are answering those polls you interact with all the time, and maybe they're going to vote yes for you just because you're a swell guy that they know? And then the other one was shiv at local practice. So this is, are you practicing against, there's never a night in your area to kind of guide you a little bit, or there are tons of nights in your area. So this one I just kind of broke into quarters here. And then let's go to the next one that shows the trends. Small trends, but they're there. So, if you have shivs in your area, again, if you have very few, 775 median number of practices to get knighted and 12 years. If you had an above average number of SHIV in your area, that drops to 700 practices and drops to 10.5 years. So it does seem to help. My takeaway from this is if you don't live in an area with a lot of nights, I'm not suggesting that you move, but that you at least be aware of that, and you might need to travel some. Like, understand you can't just, some people have the luxury of just sitting around their practice that's 10 minutes from their house that has 4 Dukes at it and 5 nights, and they never have to travel. Other people are going to have to travel some. And as I said, the guys that tell my area is like, hey, we built up a pretty good practice, but let's make sure we make up to Nutley, 3, 4, 5 times a year. Next one. And this one was number of nights at your practices. Same thing. There's a definite trend, particularly if you look at the right column, 14 years to become knighted if you had under half, and it gets down to 10 if you have nights all the time at your practices.
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that one I found pretty interesting. I will say that my practice, when I first started there 8 years ago, and again, I had a big break before that, and then before that, I just kind of screwed off. We didn't have a single grant of arms in our practice. And we thought we had a pretty good practice going on. And now we're at 2 to 3 consistent nights at our practice, 2 to 4 consistent nights at our practice. Aaron is getting knighted in a couple of months, so that's going to be another one. Yeah, and it's there's a lot more knowledge. I've learned so much in just the last couple of years with some knights in the area, and a lot of them are just the same people. They just know more than we did 8 years ago.
Well, I think also knowing more is coming out of shows like this and things like that, because we're communicating much better across the nation and across all the SCA in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Next slide. What are we up to? We're up to, I got about 7 more slides left. Travel distance. This one I found interesting. No one said, let's say we had 6% say they occasionally travel up to 3 hours. So this is how far do you travel to events or practices, right? And again, it's going to be different. Some people out west, like in the Midwest, or I'm sorry, not the Midwest, like the Southwest. If you're in like Arizona, you might have to travel really far to get anywhere. It is going to be this compared to me in the megalopolis of the Northeast, right? But only 6% they said they occasionally travel up to 3 hours. No one said they travel less than that. Everyone says they travel often up to 3 hours and occasionally up to 5 hours or more. But what I found interesting was once you got up to this 3 hour mark occasionally, there was no correlation. None at all. Everything was the same number of practices. It was like 12 years and 700 practices for everybody across the board. So to me, that might say you may not have to travel from, New Jersey to Montreal, often, but you might have to travel just enough to make sure you're hitting sort of like enough major events to getting around to enough nights and enough variety and enough like different kinds of fighters. That's kind of what my take is out of that. It's not that you need to travel all the way across the other side of the kingdom to make sure you absolutely get those people voting for you. Let's go to the next one. This one, and there's not a lot of trends here, but I just threw this out here because I wanted to see if there would be trends. Experience-related hobbies. Most people did not play sports. Most people did not have most knights did not play sports before they got knighted. Most of them did not have martial arts backgrounds. Most people did not come from foam fighting or steel fighting. Let's see. And then the next slide to see if there were any trends. There were small trends, but I would call these almost insignificant, maybe a little bit in the median number of practices. In terms of number of years to get knighted, I didn't see any big trends. Black belts and people that played sports in college, I thought I was going to see some big trends there, but there actually weren't any at all. It seems like if you come into this sport with a black belt in karate, maybe you would have the background, but maybe you're just distracted or maybe you're not as motivated as someone else. I don't know. But it did not seem like there was a huge it did not seem like being an athletic person. I don't know what you guys did. I know Duke Sean says that his only athletic pursuit has been, the SCA. And he's obviously a good fighter. So not any real big trends here. So hey, if you never played any sports, never did a martial art, don't worry. You'll be fine. Next one. Oh, and I should say real quick, and again, everything is, it's individual. So for example, I know like Duke Sven and Antigone came from a foam fighting background. That's not to say that an individual can't take, a big experience and translate it directly. We're just not seeing those trends across the board. And this is sort of a summary of everything. So which activities and what kind of effects do they have? Obviously, practice frequency is the biggest effect. The more you go to your armored practice fighting, that's the biggest effect you're going to have. Areas where I found positive effects, significant positive effects, Pell work, weapon focus is what I'm going to call, singling in on a weapon and really focusing on it versus just kind of like screwing around all the time. Again, that's not to say that the weapon's depth isn't important, but I think it's like people that kind of focus and really work on mastering a weapon versus just kind of like every practice they pick up something different. Video review has a positive effect. Cardio has a positive effect. Weights, practicing with chivalry, going around and meeting lots of different nights. I found the amount of travel, once you get past that base of like 3 hours occasionally, it does not seem to have a huge effect. Experience and related hobbies, I did not think had a huge effect. And then the last one here was holding an official position, 91% did. So I think you should definitely do that. And then I think I've got just a couple more left here. Next slide. This one, I'll explain this real quickly. All I did was I looked at people that had multiple of those things. They were like in the upper 75% of Pell work, and upper 75% of having nights at their practice, and upper 75% of doing cardio. And there's a definitely trend so the top chart there is number of activities in the top quartile. And it seems like the more of those things you do, the much more quickly you get knighted. So that first bar is they got knighted within 2 to 5 years because they did everything. And then it slowly goes down to the right. And then I looked at people that were in the bottom quartile, like people that never did Pell work, never did cardio, never did strength training. And it seems like it trends in the opposite direction, meaning that the more things that you never do, the longer it's going to take you to get knighted. So again, all this stuff is telling us that all the things that we say you should do tend to trend in the direction that we believe it should trend in. Next slide. And then these are Sir Barry's rules of thumb. Each practice gets you knighted 1 week quicker. Each practice with a knight gets you knighted 1.5 weeks quicker. So I'm just showing you there's a little bit of extra value if you're practicing with knights. Each serious video review, however you define that. But each time you take some video and like really analyze it. That could take a week off of how long it takes to get knighted. Then each Pell session 1 day. So like I said before, 1% better for a practice, 0.1% better for Pell session. All these things add up over time. What we don't know is how talented are you? Your baseline might be 25 years and all these things you do are taking off time. And then cardio and weights have an impact. And then last slide, most important slide. This was the biggest trend. People who watch Coach's Corner may never become knights, but they will certainly join the Cool Kids Club.
Is there stats on that somewhere?
I've got hard data.
Okay, I just double checking.
You're a member of the chivalry, so we have to trust you.
Ouch.
It's interesting though, just one little footnote at the end there. Some of those ways you looked at the data kind of made me think, because we did a lot of travel in this kingdom in the 90s. I mean, we would drive to Nordskogen, which was 12 hours one way for a Saturday tournament. But maybe it's like one of those cause correlation things that at the time there were so few active chivalry in the kingdom, you kind of had to go where they were. And, and then when we had that big reset, because the 90s was such a big spike of chivalry, it fell to one of the things you talked about was there were more groups that had knights and masters local to them for that benefit that you showed in your statistics, so that the 90s was like an outlier almost, that looking at the 90s by itself makes the data look weird. But when you draw it out the way you did, it's like suddenly 80 chivalry got added in a 10-year period. And there were a lot more groups that had at least one knight, where at the beginning of the 90s, that was not true.
Yeah, and I think, we're just talking, oops, that's, I think the wrong one. Oh, no. Here's a good one. I think Bari loves data. We did learn that from this show. If anyone didn't learn it from the show, please re-cue this back up and play it again before you go to bed.
Hey,
Second one.
Hold on, real quick. I want to give you a quick story on that. So I ran college cross country. My freshman year, I was on the varsity team, and we ran our first race. And the next day, we're going out on a run, and I'm telling them about how I went home. I took a 3x5 cart, and I graphed the splits I had on each mile of the race. It's a 5-mile race, and I had adjustments. Yep. The first mile was hilly, and the third mile was hilly, and had all these adjustments. And I was showing it to everybody on the team like I thought this was the most amazing thing, and they just thought I was a huge nerd and that I was a weirdo, and they made fun of me for it. So, and then I found the SBA.
And I think this one really fits it. And William, you said this is that absolutely we traveled. One reason we traveled, though, I think, was to be seen. It wasn't necessarily to be better. I think the getting better was a byproduct, but if we had those same nights closer, or different nights closer, it would have been the same byproduct. But we had to get to those different regions all the different regions a couple times a year. So, so people knew who you were and could see what you do.
Something else we had with that too was we were pushing each other hard. I remember that Kaylee event I came up for when we were there too late to fight, and you and me and Stefan Edgermont went outside middle of winter.
Oh, man.
Something definitely wrong with us. But the three of us that was some of the hardest fighting I had ever done. And as fighters tripled, people came outside to fight with us, and it was all unbelts.
Who was the old school knight that came out with mace?
Oh my God, I was about to say his name and you said something. Oh my God, I've never been hit that hard in my whole life.
Oh my God, you're not kidding.
I got him to take that leg blow though. Stefan said I couldn't make him take a leg blow. I made him take one. Oh gosh, it's on the tip of my tongue. Yeah, we're waxing. Sorry, that was.
Anyway, it's been a long evening. Let's go ahead and anybody have anything else so we can let our folks go?
No, all good.
Yeah, I'm good. Like I said, I'm gonna put my my slides up. It's actually in just a YouTube video. I'm gonna put them up in the comment section on our YouTube version. I'll put them up there, and then it's also gonna be part of my SCA Talks playlist. If everybody wants to kind of go back through it, obviously they can always revisit this show, but it'd just be a little more quickly to just go through the slides.
Yep.
You can post mine as well if you want. It's fine.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. So we'll try to get all of that stuff up tomorrow or Friday. And I want to thank everybody for coming out. The discussion was incredible.
Almost overwhelming. I couldn't keep up with all the comments.
Oh, I couldn't either. I was just so much.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, I'm happy everybody was excited. It's probably one of the biggest shows we've had, and we've had some big shows lately. And for everybody to still stay around this late, I can't thank you more than enough. You guys make the show as informative as our guests, and
thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming out, and thank you for taking those numbers, because I think that's important history. I'll post up a couple other things that we talked about, some older video that William did. I'll post up where those can be found. Some of those can be found. And next week we have, I'm sure that Bari did not look this up, although, and I have to touch, or not next week, 2 weeks from now.
I hope it's not me. I'm going to be in Disney next week.
Oh, congratulations. So we're going to talk, in fact, I'm going to have to re-listen to this book, Strength to Strength. It's an interesting book regarding going from being a competitor to being a teacher. Working through the age kind of fall off, because we do hit a point and then we come back down. And coming back down that hill, sometimes for many people is very difficult. Hopefully we can discuss the benefits of when you're coming down that other side, and some of the things you can look at. Many of us become more, we train more, we help others more, and those are benefits, and we have to look at those benefits just as much as we look at our own benefits climbing up. So, hopefully we get have a nice conversation about kind of that aging effect in the SCA, and how to still feel like you're important and that you're doing things, and One of the I've been watching this with a number of my peers going to other martial sports like fencing or going to ANS, the people who finally is like, you know what, I'm going to go do that ANS that I love doing, just never had enough time to do. And I've known a number of them become laurels now. And it's so cool to watch. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. I think it should be a great episode, and hopefully it'll help some folks out. Other than that, I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank our guest, Count William. And I hope everybody has a great night. Thank you for hanging out with us, and have a wonderful weekend and holiday.